Good morning, everyone. While I set some stuff up, can you do me a favor? Can you just put your hand up for a sec? Yeah. And then can you just turn around and say hi to your friend on the right side, and then wish them a great day? Thank you. Is it good? All right. Have fun. So, my name is Yann Braga, and I'm here to talk about Storybook 7. I'm a maintainer of Storybook, as mentioned already, and I work for Chromatic as an open source engineer. I was going to ask you to raise your hand to know who knows Storybook, but apparently a lot of people already did that. So just quick question, who here is using Storybook 7? Oh yeah, that's about 0.2%. Awesome. Hopefully at the end of the talk, that's going to change. So I just want to introduce, first of all, what's Storybook for the ones who don't know about it. I think pretty much all of us, if not most of us, are working, if this is working, are working with UI. So when building UI, nowadays, it's such a complex thing, right? Before, we just put lots of tables on HTML and the problem was gone. But now we need to account for mobile, we need to account for accessibility, we need to account for SEO, security, and we need to make sure that our components are componentized and we're not just copy-pasting code like I know some of you might be doing this. So building UI nowadays is still quite complex, and we kind of need tools or processes to ease that out for us. So here's an example of, pretty much my daily exercise when I'm building a component, and then I need to spin up the application. I need to click here and there to kind of get my component into a specific state, like a sidebar that contains a item in the checkout. And sometimes that is great, but sometimes that is really awful, depending on the app you're working on. Sometimes your app might take 2 minutes to build. Sometimes it might take 10 minutes to build. I did work on a project like that. And, it's kind of painful. So wouldn't it have been better if you were able to isolate and verify all of your use cases from your component in a different place, like a workbox or a sandbox environment? So when it comes to design, the designers, they probably are using Figma nowadays or something like that. They basically have this sticker sheet where they pretty much create and prototype their components outside of the context of the full design. And they can easily visualize all of the variants, they can document those things for their colleagues, and then they work on moving those over to the actual design. So Storybook is kind of like a sticker sheet for UI components. You can render your component in isolation, and then you can provide mock data to get your component into different states. So here's an example of a restaurant card. Just to make you a little hungry, we're almost ready for break. And we have different variants for that restaurant card, which is maybe easy sometimes to see in the actual application, but let's say the loading state, it might be quite complex to actually get it there, because you're not going to be refreshing the browser and looking at that, right? So Storybook would allow you to visualize all of those states across the board and even test even more variants, like a dark mode and a light mode. And that's pretty much what Storybook provides to you as the first experience. You can have a sidebar with some components in your application, and then you can see them in isolation, where you can work on them, make sure that they work in isolation, make sure you have a great API for your components, and then bring them into your full app. There are thousands of companies and teams using Storybook, and that varies from Microsoft, Netflix, Spotify, Twitter, and many more. And a lot of people might be thinking that Storybook is a tool for design systems, and that's it, that Storybook is somehow limited or something like that. But in Storybook, you can develop pretty much anything you would like. That varies from a small button to a full-featured checkout page, or even games. I think I saw that somewhere. I'm not sure. Anyways, thanks a lot, Joe, for that. So there's also another example which I really love. People really did stretch Storybook when they started to develop a full game in Storybook, fully 3D, where each of their stories could show different assets like weapons and characters and different scenes. And that makes it so easy for you to showcase pretty much the landscape of your entire game. And you can pretty much apply this for many other scenarios, right? So exactly what is Storybook going to provide us, and especially Storybook 7? So Storybook kind of revolves around 3 concepts: developing, testing, and documenting. So when it comes to development, Storybook is a tool that works with so many different combinations of frameworks and builders like Webpack and Vite and whatnot. So I think in order to show you the development experience, I should just do a demo. And let's hope for the demo gods to not give me some effect. So hopefully this is going to be easy to visualize. 1 second. All right. So here is Meal Drop, a Uber Eats-like app, where I have, let's say, a list of restaurants. And then from each category I choose, I can see a list of these restaurant card components. Now, I might want to see all of them in actually Storybook. So what happens is, as you're developing these components, if you want to test them, you're very likely going to open your editor, and you're going to go to your source directories, and then you have some components. And let me make this a little bigger. And then from the component you want to test, you probably are going to create a .test file. And then in your test, you're going to do, whatever thing you want to test, which is pretty great. And you all should be testing your components if you're not. And the bad thing here is that as you're running your tests, you're not getting that visual feedback. And Storybook kind of like gives you that experience. So in Storybook, what you can do is you can create a button, let's say a component.stories.tsx or JS or TS, where you can define a couple of things. So you have what we call a meta, which is a default export. And that tells Storybook that this is the component that I care about. And then you have what we call stories. And those stories, they provide some metadata or some annotations to your component. So my component receives props, and it's a primary button. But if I want it to be secondary, I say primary false. So what I can do is, in Storybook, I can define args, and I can pass certain property to it, which will be passed down to the component. Now, for the people who are not using Storybook 7, or maybe they're not experimenting with some features from Storybook 6, they might not understand this format over here. It looks much simpler than before. So this is what we call the CSF, Component Standard Format, version 3. In previous versions of Storybook, you would have to create like a template, and then you need to define a lot of basically boilerplate to get something going. But in Storybook 7, we infer your component by getting from the meta, and then essentially we have an implicit render function that just renders your component without you having to set anything. Now, if you want to set a render function and you want to do something custom, you can write a render function like this. And you can pretty much put whatever you want in here, and that's going to be respected. But by default, we know that a lot of people don't want to care about that. So let me go ahead and actually just put this to the side. And I'm going to open my terminal. And for the ones using Storybook for a long time, there's a lot of people complaining that Storybook is slow. And we're basically doubling down on speed and performance. So let me show you right now what is going on in Storybook 7 land. So maybe I'm going to get my phone so I can play some games while it's building. Oh, no. It's not as fun as the before. So it took about 5 seconds to build a full Storybook that includes about over 40 pages and components. And that is wild. So let's say I want to work on that restaurant card component, which I see over here on the left. And I can visualize that component in isolation, but I can also see all of the variants of it, which is pretty cool. And I also have add-ons, which provide me some extra functionality. And for instance, I can play around with the name, because maybe if I change this to German or something, the name will be too long, and then the design might break. Or maybe I want to play with some props. For instance, oh, what if the restaurant card does not have any category? That's how it looks like. So this could give you some ideas of edge cases, or maybe some other scenarios that you can create as different stories. And then you can click on this button to kind of like go back to the previous state. So suppose I want to work on this component. So that is a restaurant card, and I have my stories file. And I want to create a new story. So let's say I want to have a promoted badge or something. So I'm just going to copy this component. I'm going to call this promoted. And I'm going to put this new property is promoted to true. So because the CSF3 is based on objects, I can just spread the properties for my default state, which already provides some mock data. And as I save it, I instantly have my new story over here, which does not have what I want yet. So I go into my restaurant card file, and let's say I want to add this new tag and say like favorite. As I save it, I get that instantly on the browser. Wait, I'm pointing to the wrong side. And the thing is, I could have done this anywhere else, but because in Storybook I have my list of scenarios, I can see what is going on, and no, this is not what I want. So there is a bug here, and I quickly identified because I documented my other states. So over here, I can maybe pass this is promoted prop, and then wrap this element with that, so it's only shown when it's promoted. And then my problem is fixed. So now, after doing that for a couple of seconds, I actually have a new state documented in Storybook. And that's pretty much the magic of Storybook. You have developed stuff by using Storybook to aid you, but at the same time, you were tricked to write tests. Because in a way, these are tests. You're testing pretty much the important scenarios of your components. So go in back to the slides. If I find my cursor, yeah, I did find it. All right. So yeah, I showed you how simple it is to develop a component in isolation, do some changes in it, and see it in Storybook. But that restaurant card is pretty much a pure component where it receives some props, it reacts to them, and that's it. But what if my component is not so simple? Maybe I have a fully stateful component, like a form, which needs some interactions on top of it. So am I going to only write the default state, and then I'm going to have to manually try all of these things? Well, not anymore. In Storybook 7, we are introducing a lot of focus on testing. So we are providing you tools to simulate user behavior, like clicking, filling forms, hovering, and many other stuff. So we introduced a concept called the interaction tests. And it revolves around a new annotation for your story. So we've seen args, and there are others as well. And then there's a new annotation called the play function. So that play function is going to play after your component renders. And then you can do pretty much whatever you want. And because it's just our arbitrary JavaScript, you can do anything random stuff you want, but we also are providing tools which are based on testing library, for instance, and Jest, to allow you to get the primal experience when testing your components. So here's an example. We have a button for deleting customer, but that's not exactly what we want to test. We want to test if I click on that button, it opens a modal. And before, that was a little tricky to do. You would need to actually create a wrapper component for Storybook just for that case. And nowadays, you can basically add this new annotation called the play function, where we provide you the canvas element that wraps your story. And then you can use testing library and just expect, which is something that you might be already used with. And it's pretty much the same syntax. So in here, I am clicking on a button that has the name delete customer, and I'm expecting a modal with the text, are you sure, to be in the document. Those helpers, they come from our own wrappers. That makes them browser compatible, but also that provides some extra features, which I'm going to show you right now. So by using those tools, not only you get to see the actual interacted component state, but you also get to see all of your interaction tests visualized in an add-on panel in Storybook. So in that particular scenario, if you look at your component, you get this panel. And then you can actually step back and forth in the interactions to see how your component behaves in each of your interaction steps. So that is really cool, and I'm about to show you, once again, a demo. So going back to our storybook. Wait, where is it? OK, that's good. So in our storybook, I have all kinds of components. For instance, I have an entire restaurant detail page, which is actually fully functional, and I can interact with it and do a bunch of stuff. I can use some interesting tools from Storybook to visualize that page in like multi-themes and see how that looks like, and that's pretty cool. So this page, I can also mock requests using mock service worker to get into specific states like erroring or 404 or a loading state that is so hard to reproduce. So over here, I have a specific story called with modal open that pretty much achieves that same scenario. And as I bring my interactions panel to the side, I can see the interactions right here. So as I click to go all the way back, I see my initial state of my component. And then as I go forward to the next interaction, I see what happens then. If, for some reason, I introduced a bug in my code, and that didn't actually open the modal, as the interactions ran, that would fail, and I would get the failure directly here. So the biggest difference is that I'm getting that experience, very visual, and I can debug everything in the browser, because all of these things are getting executed in the browser. And to make it even more fun, I'm going to open a published storybook. So this is not local. And I'm going to open an even more complex story. So I actually put the entire app in Storybook. And over here, I have my home page, I have the category list page, and I have the category detail page, and so on and so forth. But as I open the add-ons panel, and I see my interactions, and once again, this is not local, this is deployed, right? I see that some interactions are happening. So as I go back, this is actually the entire app in the home page, where I interact by clicking on certain things to go to the next pages. And I'm actually seeing the entire flow of my application. So if I click on the end-to-end, I've actually gone through all the stuff to get to that page. And therefore, I just documented an entire end-to-end flow of my app. So on the right side, I see that I have all of these steps. And in the play function, if I open the restaurant detail page, stories, not this one. It's actually user flow stories. Yeah. We also provide something called the step function, where you can wrap your code, and then, for instance, select first restaurant from the list. That step function is going to be pretty much making things more readable for your end users. So this is really cool, and you can get all kinds of experience like that. And just to make things a little more fun, I implemented something locally. So this is not a Storybook feature yet. If you want, maybe that can be. I implemented this demo mode where sometimes the interactions might happen too fast. So you might actually want to slow down and see what's going on. I can click on this button, which will re-render the component. But look at that. On the left side, I see the interactions as they're happening. And on the right side, I see the visual of what's going on. And I think this is amazing. And thank you. So we're coming from this experience where people think, oh, Storybook is only for buttons and maybe checkboxes. But as you can see, I have an entire thing over here. So this is pretty much the experience we have. And we provide also a test runner that automatically turns all your stories into tests to get a more automated experience as well. So you might want to test things locally, but you also want to publish in and run in CI. And if there's any failure, you're going to get the results. So the test runner checks for rendering errors. So any of your stories that is failing, it will be working. It will be detecting for you. And if your stories have a plague function, if there's a failure in your assertions, it will also tell you that. So Because we're using, the test runner is based on Playwright. Because we're using that, you can actually do cross-browser testing, and you can run all of those tests in parallel, which is great. But what if your tests fail? How do you debug them? Like, if I have a visual experience in local Storybook, but then I publish a Storybook, or I get a failure in the CLI, how do I debug it? Well, the Storybook test runner provides you what we call a click-to-debug experience, where if there's an error, it provides you a link on when you click, you get the story, which could be deployed or could be local, and then you can see the failure right there. And once again, this is just a browser, right? So you can put a debugger anywhere. You can click to re-render your component, and you can easily see what's going on. If there's a bug in, let's say, your branch, you can just share that Storybook with anyone in the world, and they will get the same experience. The test runner also provides experimental testing hooks, because sometimes you want to do some weird stuff. So this provides you a flexible way to do whatever you want. One example of that is you can do accessibility tests using Playwright Axe, and you can get that automated in CI. So not only you get your components tested, but also you're making sure that the accessibility standards are pretty high. The test runner also provides code coverage reports. So you might be like, yeah, but what if I'm writing this thing in Jest? I get all that stuff, but what about Storybook? Well, you get the same stuff. So the coverage reports provide you pretty much a visual way to see, oh, you're not covering this part. And that means probably that you might need to create a new story. So the code coverage is pretty cool and can be integrated with tools like CodeCov, which can be used in your workflows. And that is pretty nice. So I've been talking about developing and testing, but what about documentation? Well, Storybook 7 has put a lot of effort in documentation experience. And we have doubled down on MDX, so now we're using MDX2. And we have provided a huge amount of blocks that you can actually use to create your own documentation. So in Storybook 7, you can create, we call the unattached docs. So you can create a documentation about something that is not attached to the stories you're writing. So you might want to document your design tokens. You might want to document typography or colors or other stuff. And we also provide, for people that don't want to think too much about documenting, we provide something we call autodocs. And autodocs is, as soon as you enable it, you're going to get this automatic experience where each one of your components contains a docs entry. And then that component is going to be listing all of its variants. You're going to get access to the source. And you have like a playground environment with an actual live snippet that you don't need to maintain because it's just live. As you're typing, you're getting that experience. And I'm getting hungry. So in Storybook 7, you also have this, what we call Storybook's doc blocks. And maybe you don't want to get this automatic documentation because you really want to get like a really cool doc for your button. So you might just use those blocks to build anything custom. Here's an example of like showing usage information, showing the variants in a grid, but also maybe embedding the entire Figma design spec. So you can pretty much get all kinds of flexibility and build your own custom documentation pages the way we want. So going back to the trifecta that Storybook revolves around, we've seen that Storybook has been helping you a lot for certain things, but now it helps you even more for developing, testing, and documenting. So we've been working really, really hard, and I can tell you, really hard. It's been 2.5 years since we haven't released a major version. And Storybook 7 is right around the corner. And we're doubling down on support for different frameworks, different builders. So we have done a lot of detaching in Storybook to make it more easy to implement stuff like Vite. And in fact, we just focused a lot recently on Next.js and SvelteKit, where we provide out-of-the-box configuration for your projects, and you don't need to do any of the weird stuff you find on blog posts from last year. And in fact, we extended the tool set so that people from the community can create something like Quick implementation, which is already live and you can try it out, or maybe Solid, which is currently in a PR that you can try out soon. To make this even more official, we implemented what we call the ecosystem CI, which is essentially a combination of things. So we are heavily testing dozens of components and dozens of framework configurations every single day in our CI structure. If we get an error, we get reported on Discord, and we can work on them right away. We also have this status page that provides you a visual way of all of the Storybook versions that have been tested and all of the features which are either working or not. Because of this thing, we actually detected some issues with Angular 15 and some issues with Vue 4 and a weird issue with a Webpack dependency. But we were able to fix them within 24 hours just because of this experience. So Storybook can bring you hundreds of improvements, and you can try that today. We are nearing release candidates, and we provide you two options. So either if you don't have Storybook in your project, you can run this single command, which will set up Storybook for you, or you can migrate your Storybook by running Storybook upgrade -- pre-release. And the upgrade experience is going to include auto migrations that help you do all that kind of like boring work, but just in an automated fashion. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity and for being here and for saying hi to your new friend. And I just wanted to also announce that we're going to have a Storybook 7 conference in March 14, where we're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff in detail. There's so much more stuff that I haven't mentioned. And we're also going to have very interesting talks from different people that do work with Storybook integrations and whatnot. Feel free to read the QR code to get access to the link. And once again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.